800 dead soldiers on a single Guadalcanal sandbar. On August 21, 1942, 12 hours of combat ended in a bloodbath caused by an atypical weapon. The American 37mm M3 gun emerged in 1938, copying the German PaK-36. This obsolete 414-kilogram cannon sat exposed 230 meters from the enemy. Gunners shoved a tin canister round into the breech and fired, the metal casing disintegrating at the muzzle. Steel shrapnel hissed loudly across the field, ripping through river water and wet sand. 122 steel balls every 2.5 seconds. One squad lost 8 of its 10 men to a Japanese machine gun on an abandoned tractor. The survivors kept loading. 9% of total production. Bodies littered the sandspit because of the Japanese doctrine of Seishin. A single infantryman fixed his bayonet and charged head-on. The Imperial Japanese Army relied on spiritual willpower. Commanders believed a soldier ready to die could break any line. In the 1930s, this tactic succeeded. During the 1937 Battle of Shanghai, Chinese battalions lacked heavy machine guns to lay down dense barrage fire. Massed bayonet attacks shattered nationalist troops holding only bolt-action rifles. They expected victory through sheer willpower. They collided with the reality of automatic weapons. On Guadalcanal, the mathematics changed. Marines tested this new arithmetic of survival along the Henderson Field perimeter. Muzzle flashes strobed through the canopy at 3:30 in the morning. Between August and October 1942, darkness hides charging bodies. A Model 1917 Browning fires continuously into the trees. The water boils. A Japanese bullet pierces the steel cylinder. Steam hisses from the hole. The weapon seizes and stops firing. With its tripod and water, the gun weighed over 47 kilograms. Moving this bulk through thick vegetation was physically impossible. The 1st Marine Division relied on automatic rifles. But the BARs emptied their magazines too quickly against human waves. They ran dry. No single infantry weapon could deliver the required density of fire. A Japanese company demanded a continuous wall of lead. 200 charging men across a sandbar width of 7.5 meters. This deficit in fire density nearly broke Edson's Ridge. 840 Marines stood against 3,000 attacking soldiers. Major General Kiyotaki Kawaguchi sent his infantry up a 900-meter jungle slope. Colonel Merritt Edson's raiders met them with 60mm mortars. The 3rd Battalion of the 11th Marines dropped 105mm shells within 180 meters of their own lines. The M2A1 howitzer possessed a fragmentation radius that made strikes at this distance deadly for the Marines themselves. The perimeter survived, but the assault wiped out the 1st Parachute Battalion. 89 men walked away. The infantry urgently needed light artillery with canister shot. 37mm anti-tank guns sat idle on the beach. They waited for Japanese armor that never came. The guns kept looking out to sea. To answer the threat of human waves, the Marines rolled out the M3. This light weapon triggered the coming slaughter. It was a paradox. Built to kill tanks, it failed against armor, yet became the ultimate answer to Japanese infantry. At Kasserine Pass, crews fired at German tanks. A dull metallic clank echoed as shells bounced off harmlessly. The 37mm gun lost its primary role. Still, factories built 18,702 units. The Pacific Theater changed its purpose. The secret was its mass. 413 kilograms. That is almost a third of a standard German PaK-40. At Tarawa, Marines hauled it through chest-deep surf. Shoulders strained, boots slipped on submerged coral. They dragged the carriage ashore by sheer force. Its anti-tank failure defined its new Pacific role. The gun deployed directly in the first assault wave. 9% of all production. Out of 78 million shells, only this fraction was the M2 canister required for the front line. The shell casing looked like ordinary roofing tin. Inside sat 122 hardened steel balls, each 9.5 millimeters thick. The total cartridge weighed 1.5 kilograms. The thin tin shattered exactly at the muzzle break. The casing vanished entirely. A dense cone of steel spheres surged forward. They traveled at 762 meters per second, exceeding the speed of sound by more than double. The anti-tank barrel became a giant shotgun. This steel swarm swept a target area 228 meters deep. Facing a constant deficit, gun captains hid these rare shells in private trench stockpiles. Commanders issued strict rules of engagement. Crews waited until the massed infantry stepped into the kill zone and pulled the lanyards. Gunners hoarded these rare canisters specifically for the night of August 21st, 1942. That evening, Sergeant Major Jacob Vuza crawled into the perimeter at Alligator Creek. Blood poured from multiple deep bayonet stab wounds across his chest. The tortured scout dragged himself through the dense jungle undergrowth to deliver one message. Earlier, Colonel Clifton Cates had prepared the bottleneck. He recognized the tactical value of the narrow sandbar blocking the Elu River, a waterway the Marines misnamed Alligator Creek. He embedded two 37mm guns into the forward defensive line. Crews positioned their weapons right at the water's edge. The local geography forced any massed infantry charge into a tight corridor. The trap stood ready. The bleeding scout finally reached the command post and confirmed the Japanese objective. They were coming. The scout's warning materialized when a green flare ripped the darkness at 0130. 100 soldiers from Colonel Ichiki's 2nd Company instantly rushed the narrow sandbar. Machine guns and initial canister shots broke this frontal assault at the waterline. By 0230, a second wave of 200 men attempted the same approach. The result mirrored the first attempt, though one Japanese team managed to mount a Nambu machine gun on an abandoned amphibious tractor. They directed suppressing fire toward the Marine emplacements. Corporal Jim Oliphant and his crew physically grabbed their 37mm gun during the exchange. They pivoted the heavy carriage, abandoning a purely frontal defense to aim the weapon straight down the longitudinal axis of the beach. The sand spit measured barely 7.5 meters across. This geometry meant a single cone of canister shot completely saturated the corridor, leaving 0 blind spots. Every 2.5 seconds, a new blast of steel balls shredded the confined space. The 37mm barrel glowed red in the tropical night from the sustained friction. Simultaneously upstream, a second gun, commanded by Corporal George Parker, opened fire on an isolated flanking group. While the 37mm cannons sealed the corridor, the machine guns completed the mathematics of the slaughter. 200 confirmed hits belonged to a single weapons crew. Private Albert Schmidt fired a water-cooled Browning .30 caliber. The guns worked in tight concert. The machine guns swept the center of the sandbar. The artillery locked down the flanks. A Japanese grenade blinded Schmidt. He stayed on the trigger while his wounded corporal shouted aiming directions. Almost 800 dead Japanese soldiers covered one bank by dawn. By 1700 hours, the shooting stopped. 34 Marines died. Out of Colonel Ichiki's 917 men, 800 lay dead. 85% of the force fell in one night. Such a casualty rate means a combat unit physically ceases to exist as a military formation. Colonel Ichiki burned his regimental colors. The annihilation of Ichiki's regiment proved the baseline efficiency of the 37mm weapons. Now came the wider test. Captain Regan Fuller's 3 gun crews waited in total silence at the jungle edge. Late October, the battle for Henderson Field. Japanese infantry massed in the dark for a frontal charge. Fuller ordered a single canister round from each barrel. The formation vanished into the dirt. A year later, the combat shifted. The 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, dragged their 900-pound artillery pieces through the chest-deep water of Tarawa. A column of 200 enemy soldiers sprinted across the narrow coral island. The Marine infantry yelled for rapid canister fire. The combat geometry never changed across the Pacific. A narrow approach forced attackers into a tight target. Then the gunners pulled the lanyard. 122 steel balls erupted in an expanding cone every 2.5 seconds. This matched the cyclic density of a heavy machine gun, but instantly blanketed a wide kill zone. The canister shell solved exactly one problem on the front line. It stopped massed infantry in a narrow corridor. Fuller's frontline solution crashed straight into the 17th Japanese Army command structure. Why did headquarters dismiss a total catastrophe as a mere fluke? Officers concluded that Ichiki simply deployed too few men. The dry rustle of paper reports filled the 17th Army headquarters. Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Matsumoto read the dispatches of the detachment's annihilation, declared the numbers false, and authorized another identical assault. Generals decided the tactical error lay not in charging canister shells, but in lacking sufficient assault mass. Within 3 weeks, 6,000 soldiers under Kawaguchi hit Edson's Ridge. The largest mass charge hit Saipan on the 7th of July, 1944. General Yoshitsugu Saito sent 4,300 men forward. That exact number equals a complete modern United States Army mechanized infantry brigade thrown into one kill zone. Staff officers never adapted to the reality of defensive firepower. Commanders eventually shifted surviving units to the cave systems of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, only after losing their territories and divisions.
9%. At 228 meters, the gun crew became the primary target. The high explosive round held 39 grams of TNT. That is less than a grenade launcher. Short-range forced artillerymen directly onto the front line. They absorbed every bullet aimed at the infantry. Quartermasters rationed the 9% production by index cards, treating the shells exactly like morphine. At the Tenarue River, overlapping fire corridors demanded a heavy toll. Pomeroy's position stood closest to the water. An abandoned amphibious tractor sat across the creek. A 6.5mm Nambu machine gun fired from its deck. Deafening clatter of bullets hammered the steel shield of the 37mm gun. The surviving crew kept loading anyway. While internet myths conflate this action with Edson's Ridge, the true price was paid at the riverbank. The casualties numbered 8 out of 10 men.
The tin can filled with steel balls vanished. But the idea of turning an artillery piece into a giant shotgun reached the deserts of Iraq. 8 lost artillerymen at the Tenarue riverbed forged a doctrine that outlived their 37mm gun. The evolution started early. By 1957, Picatinny Arsenal and the Whirlpool Corporation developed the Beehive round. 8,000 steel flechettes packed inside a 105mm shell. It ripped through the jungle foliage of Vietnam in 1966. The lineage continued into the 21st century. By 2003, the 120mm M1028 canister round deployed in Iraq. A heavy metallic clank echoes inside the Abrams tank turret as the loader slams the shell into the breech. It holds 1,098 tungsten balls. Tungsten is 1.7 times denser than lead. This physical property guarantees fatal penetration at 600 meters. The concept remains exactly the same. Corporal Jim Olive's crew fired that first improvised can on the 21st of August, 1942. They established a standard that armed every subsequent Marine landing. The guns are gone, the sandbar remains. The geometry of a sandspit and a giant shotgun has not changed in 400 years.